Hello internet friends, Chris Masto here with another video about, can you guess what it's going to be? Yes, it's the NS panel, that's right. Stuff keeps happening. It's almost like we need a daily news show with all the latest developments on this thing. But don't worry, the NS panel is not the only thing I'm going to talk about. A little sneak peek. I'm going to do a video about the Lanbon L8 and OpenHasp, so look forward to that coming soon. So I've got a collection of stuff I want to talk about today. First, I want to do a little bit of bookkeeping. My stupid little YouTube channel now has over 4,000 subscribers. A lot of them are thanks to folks who came in through the NS panel video. I'm just amazed by that. I want to again say thank you to everybody. Thank you to all the comments. It's been so polite and helpful to each other. At this rate, like I might get to 5,000 someday, and I feel like I have to do something at that point. Maybe I'll have a giveaway, or we'll have some kind of party call. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But I just did want to acknowledge that. And what I'd like to do in this video is kind of have a format where we'll do some tip, trick type of thing. I do want to tell you all about a very important discovery for people who have the European version of this thing. I have the US version here, but the European version has a calibration problem with the screen, and we figured out how to fix it. So that's pretty awesome. And then I'd like to revisit the topic of dimming the screen. My previous video was about one way to do that, but since then there have been some great comments on there and discussion about other ways to do it. So I'd like to do a little demonstration there, and then move from there into actually using the sleep mode on this, which is something you can do. So we can go over why you might want to do that, or why you might want to stick with the dimming. And then I have something very special at the end of the video, so you'll just have to watch the whole thing. I think people who don't know you can skip ahead on YouTube call that a teaser. And so without further ado, let's head on over to the computer and get started with our NS panel tip of the week. By the way, if I could borrow your attention for just a moment, I would like to engage in a short rant. There are a couple of turns of phrase that YouTubers seem to use all the time. I'm guilty of using one of them a lot myself, and I'm trying to stop. So if you catch me, feel free to call me out. But like a little flaw that you can't unsee, when I tell you about these, you're going to hear them everywhere, so be warned. The first one is the phrase, "without further ado." And I guarantee you, 90% of the time, when people on YouTube say, "so without further ado," you're about to hear 2 minutes of further ado. There's no point in saying "without further ado." Just go on to the next thing, okay? Please. And the second one, and I admit, this is something I do and I have to stop, is when people say, "as you can see." Half the time when people say, "as you can see," you can't actually see. They're holding up something that's really small and it's blurry, or the camera's pointed in a different direction, or it's not framed properly or whatever, and they're all "as you can see," and I'm yelling at the screen, "No, I can't see. Why are you telling me I can see something I can't see?" Okay, I'm sorry. I got a little carried away there. It's fine. It's good. It's all good. We're all friends here. I'm calm. We're going to do the NS panel video now. It's going to be great. See you over there. And here we are back in ESP Home and Home Assistant. This week's tip makes it even easier to work on a custom UI without having to constantly go back and forth to reload the file. If you saw the last video I posted, we added this button here to make it quick and easy to update the TFT file on the panel. That's great, but when you're working on something in the interface, maybe you make a small change and you want to try it out, so you have to go and save the TFT, then you have to go back to Home Assistant, make sure you're on the right screen, click the button, wait for it to load, then go back to the editor, make your change. Wouldn't it be great if the panel just updated every time you save the file? Well, we can do that with a folder watcher in Home Assistant. What you need to do for that is to edit your configuration.yaml. If you don't already have a folder watcher enabled, this is where you turn it on. We need to add two things. The first one is to give permission to access the config folder. We do this by adding config to the allow list external DIRs list. That's a bit of a tongue twister. Once you've done that, you can enable the folder watcher integration, and you can specify the folder for it to watch, save the file, and now you have to restart Home Assistant, which you can do from the file editor here. And once Home Assistant comes back up, we can now go into our automations and we can create a new automation here. We'll start empty and we'll call this one Update demo panel TFT on file change. This isn't super complicated, but there are a couple of little details. The mode defaults to single, which means that if this automation is triggered while it's still running, it won't run again. I think it's better here to set it to queued, just in case you save the file twice in rapid succession, you don't want to miss the second update. But the queue length only needs to be 2 because that second update will catch whatever changes came in during the first update. And then what we want to trigger on is an event, and the event type is going to be folder watcher. And for the event data, we're going to specify the event type modified and the path that it's watching, /config/www/dim-demo.tft is the file that I'm going to be saving. And then when that's triggered, what do we want to happen? We'll just call that service that updates the TFT. And that's it. So now that this automation is active, anytime I save that TFT file, it should notice that this has been updated, and it'll call this service. The other thing I did was I installed and configured the Samba add-on so that I can access the config directory from Windows. That means I can save my TFT directly into Home Assistant, which will trigger that automation, which will update the screen. So let's test it out by fixing a mistake I made last time. We're back to where I ended the last video, where we have this wake button that covers the entire screen. And if you watch really closely here, hopefully this will come up on the camera. When I touch the screen to wake this up, there's a brief flicker of green. Maybe I can do some kind of slow motion effect. When I set this button up here, I set the background color to black, but I didn't change any of these other colors. And BCO2 here is actually the color of when you're touching the button. So when I press down on that button, it turns green. And when I release it, it wakes the screen up. But the screen is waking up while the button is going away, and there's just this moment, just a fraction of a second, where it's still green. So what I should probably do is just set all of these colors to black in order to avoid any kind of weird visual artifacts like that. So now we can test this out. All I should have to do is go to File, TFT Output, just click Output, and almost instantly my screen should update. And there it is. And it looks like the screen resumes a little bit cleaner than it did before. There's no more little glitch. Now here's something I did not know about because I have the US model NS panel. Even though they both use the same screen, apparently in the European model, the bezel around the screen covers up like 32 pixels on one edge. So when you design your interface, you have to take that into account and don't go all the way to that edge. Sorry, I don't know which edge it is off the top of my head. But worse than that, there's some kind of misalignment or calibration issue with the touchscreen. So the location where you touch the screen is shifted. This doesn't happen with the Sonoff TFT, so clearly they were doing something to correct that calibration. Now this is where it gets awesome. There's an unofficial Nextion user group forum in Discord, and the folks on the Discord dug into this problem, reverse engineered what was happening, and discovered a little code when it boots up that checks to see if it's the European model, and if so, it issues an undocumented command that fixes the calibration. And now we know what that command is. So if you are using the European model and you're experiencing the touch offset, which I believe everyone would be, this is what you do. Go into program.s and put in this line. There's a link in the video description to the tips and tricks section of the wiki where this is posted. I'm trying to keep a collection there of all of these discoveries and hints. You don't want to do this for the US model because there is no offset, and this would just add one. Next topic. Now let's talk about the dimming elephant in the room. Last time I demonstrated how to dim the screen with a timer, how to wake it back up, and I put this black button over the entire screen. I did that for a couple of reasons. One is that I needed something to detect the touch and wake up the screen. The other one is I had this idea in my head that the LCD could be burning in even when the backlight is off. As far as that second thing goes, I've stared at this screen with a flashlight when the backlight is off and I don't see anything on it. I'm thinking that when you set dim to 0, they actually blank out the screen. So this whole opaque button thing probably isn't necessary at all. After I posted that video, a bunch of people said, why don't you just go to another page instead of covering the screen up with a button? And the answer to that is two things. One, I didn't really think about it. And two, I've been afraid to add a second page because I know that there's a lot of complexity with multiple pages. Like I said, I'm learning along with everybody else. And every time I see stuff about multiple pages, it talks about how objects don't update when they're not on the active page. And I was just worried about having to make a whole bunch of changes to my programming in order to be able to accommodate a second page. But it turns out this is really pretty straightforward. So let's start by just deleting this wake button, and we'll do what people suggested because I think it is a better approach. So I went over here and I created a new page, and I'm going to rename this page. Let's call it Screensaver. And we can set the background to black. I always miss that black. As bad as this editor is, if you click compile, it will at least tell you if you're referencing something that doesn't exist anymore. So since we deleted the wake button, we can now just look and see where we used it, and that'll give us an idea of what we need to fix. So this was the post initialize event on page 0. This was where we faked a click on the wake button just to make sure that it would hide itself. Don't need that anymore, so we can just delete that code. And we compile again, and we can see our next reference to wake button. This is over here on the timer event. When we blanked the screen, we needed to re-enable the wake button. In this case, we're not going to do it this way anymore. Let's change the comment to reflect what we're actually going to do. Go to Screensaver page. And then we can replace this code with page Screensaver. And I think that's all the times we mentioned the wake button. Let's just look through all these things and see if they make sense. So there's our timer event. It still makes sense to turn the screen off, save the old brightness value, set the brightness to 0, go to the screensaver page, deactivate the timer. Now this is the touch cap that keeps things awake when you're interacting with the screen. This also makes sense to keep. And then of course we have our brightness variable, which we still want to use. So at this point, this should work to blank the screen. Let's just try it out. We go in the simulator here after 3 seconds. It has indeed blanked out the screen. But of course now we have no way to wake it up. So we'll close that. And then this becomes very simple. Since there's nothing on the screensaver page, we can just go to a touch release event here. So now we want to first unblank the screen. And we'll do that by setting dim equal to our saved variable, which is brightness. But we can't just type brightness because we're on a different page. We want to refer to a variable that's on page 0. Here, let me show you here. The brightness variable, we already set this the other day to global rather than local, which means that this variable can be accessed outside of this page, but you still have to provide the full name to it, including the page name. So I need to say page0.brightness.val in order to access that variable from another page. And then we want to re-enable the timer. And now here we can't say page0.sleeptimer because when we set this up the other day, it's set to local. So we need to make this object global as well in order to be able to access it from another page. So once we change the timer to global, go back here, I should be able to reference it. page0.sleeptimer.enable equals 1. And then finally we want to switch back to page 0. So here we can just say page 0 and save. Note you can use the name or the number. So let's test this out in the simulator. Wait a few seconds, see if the screen goes off. All right, and then I'll click on here and it comes back. That's working. So let's go ahead and output the TFT, which should trigger an immediate update of the screen. Just wait for it to reboot. Okay, now we're running the new code, so I can wake it up, wait a few seconds, goes blank, wake it up again, goes blank. So this screen blanking works just like it did the other day, except we don't have the big stupid button here anymore. This is probably a much more logical, better way to do it. So I'm sorry if I led anyone down the wrong path the other day. I find I still learn from practicing the techniques, even if I end up throwing the code away and rewriting it. So I hope it wasn't too much of a waste. One other quick thing while I'm here, I wasn't going to bother demoing this, but I think it's so easy I might as well do it. I named this screensaver for a reason. Maybe you don't actually want to blank the screen, right? You could put something on here like show the weather all the time when it's not in use. So I'm just going to put a dumb text box here to stand in for whatever we would want our screensaver to be. And now the only thing we need to do differently is change this timer so that it doesn't blank the screen all the way. Maybe we just want to go to kind of a low brightness so we could just dim it down to 20 when it's not in use. I won't bother loading it onto the screen, we'll just do the simulator here. So wait a few seconds, and now instead of going off, it just goes to our screensaver page. So you could have whatever you want on here, and then when you touch this, it goes back to the main controls. So I think that's a pretty good technique. Now there's one more thing we have to fix, because we can still wake it up by touching the screen, but if we let it go to sleep and we use the physical buttons here, they're no longer waking it up. The reason is we hard-coded those the other day to click wake button, and the first thing I did was delete wake button. So we can just change that to click screensaver. Upload that code. And once again, all is right with the world. The screen dims, press one of these buttons, and it wakes up. But we are not done yet. This was all about faking sleep by blanking the screen. Nextion screens have this whole thing built in. You can set it so if there are no touches for a while, it goes into sleep. And then when you touch it, it wakes up again. The problem is that seems to be buggy on this particular screen. For some reason, it works if you set it to 3 seconds, but any longer than that, and it just never goes to sleep. It does, however, wake up on touch. We can do kind of a hybrid here where we keep our own sleep timer implementation, but we let it wake itself up. So for the third go around, I'm going to start by deleting the screensaver page, deleting the brightness variable, because we're no longer dimming and brightening the screen. We still want to keep this timer, but we can get rid of the dimming part, and we can get rid of the screensaver part. And what we'll actually do after we've disabled the timer, because I'm not sure this code will run after we enter sleep mode, we'll say sleep equals 1. But of course, it's not quite that easy. When the screen goes to sleep, it stops responding to most commands. So if you have ESP Home trying to update the time and temperature and things like that, it's going to cause a problem because it won't be acknowledging those messages. Now for automatic sleep, that's not a problem. The ESP Home Nextion component knows that when it receives a message from the screen saying I've gone to sleep, it should stop talking to it. The problem is this sleep equals 1 command doesn't send that message. So once again, we have to fake it. What we can do here is just send the same message back to ESP Home that the screen would normally send if it automatically went into sleep mode. So that's just hex 86, and then all these messages end with 3 FFs. Let me clean up the comment here a little bit. Tell ESP Home we're going to sleep. And then the other thing I want to do here, this is probably not necessary at all, but I'm going to just set thup equals 1, just to make sure that the wake up when you touch the screen thing is always activated right before we go to sleep. Missed a letter in my comment. Okay, now just reviewing here to look for any glitches or mistakes. We do want to keep things awake if the user is touching the screen. This all looks good. Now there's one little complication. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem to explain it, so I'll have to explain it as I go along. I'm going to set the sleep timer enable to start at 0. So when this boots up, the sleep timer is not going to be enabled. The reason for that is a little bit complicated. I have my timeout set to 3 seconds now for testing purposes, or maybe you want it 3 seconds. When I was going through this to figure it out, I discovered that this time is so short that the screen starts up and then goes to sleep before ESP Home gets a chance to initialize. It tries to talk to the Nextion, the Nextion's in a coma, and everything gets out of sync. Easy way to work around that is to make sure it doesn't sleep until we're ready for it. I'm gonna hit compile just to make sure I didn't screw anything up here. This gets a little harder to simulate, but we can still check here if we manually enable the timer. That should give us 3 seconds, and then screen off. And now we can see that it actually went into sleep mode. It says sleep yes. We've got our 8.6 message. Should wake on touch, which it does. However, note that the timer is not automatically re-enabled this time. And that's okay, we can do it in ESP Home code, which we will do now since everything else seems to be working okay. Let me once again take advantage of our folder watcher. Okay, it's updated, and as expected, it is not going into sleep automatically because when it boots up, the timer is disabled. So we need to make a few changes to our ESP Home config now to accommodate all these changes we made in the editor to use the actual sleep mode. So the first thing we're going to do is in our on setup, which happens after everything is fully initialized, we know here it's safe to turn the sleep timer on. So we're going to do that. Just like so. Now I'm going to copy this line because we're going to be using this a lot. Because the screen is no longer responsible for reactivating its sleep timer when you wake it up, we have to do that ourselves. Fortunately, ESP Home has an on-wake handler, so we can just put the same thing in here, fix the indentation, and now we've got 2 instances of this. So this one turns the timer on right after it boots up. This one turns the timer on every time it wakes up. And now we want to go back up to these buttons, which we've changed several times, but we can no longer wake the screen up by just clicking the screensaver. For one thing, we deleted the screensaver. For another thing, the screen is asleep. So now we have to do a little dance. The first thing we're going to do is wake up the screen. Now you might think we'd send command printf sleep equals 0. That's not going to work here because ESP Home knows the screen is asleep and it doesn't let you send it any commands. Kind of a catch-22, but it's simple enough to solve because there's actually a sleep API call where you can tell ESP Home to take the screen out of sleep, and it knows that command can be sent even when it's asleep. And of course, the other thing we need to do is to reactivate the timer. But here's where it gets a little bit complicated. When you wake the screen up, it's kind of like it needs to have its morning coffee before it's ready to listen to any commands. If you send the sleep timer enable right after you wake it up, it's going to miss this and it won't work. Now that's kind of an icky thing to write for most decent programmers. You don't want to just assume that it's 1 second, but it definitely takes a lot less than 1 second, and 1 second's not too long. And I don't really know how else to do this right now. Maybe I'll learn something better for the next video, but anyway, this is a bit of a workaround. It's a bit ugly, but all I can say is it's functional. So we're going to do the same thing for both buttons. Wake the screen up, chill out for a second, then re-enable the timer. Just taking a look here to make sure everything looks right. So to recap, we have an on setup here to turn the timer on, we have an on wake to turn the timer on, and then we have those button handlers to wake the screen up, delay a little bit, and then turn the timer on. With all of these new things, we should hopefully have exactly the functionality we want. Okay, it's booted up, timer should be enabled, and there we go. So we actually have the screen going off this time. Will it wake up when I touch the screen? Yes. Will it go to sleep again after 3 seconds? Yes. So those 2 functions are working. Now, will the physical buttons wake it up? Let's see. There we go. And then after a few seconds, it should go back to sleep again, which means the timer is being enabled properly. And so we're getting everything. The only other thing I didn't really test is If you keep fiddling with it here, it should avoid going to sleep, which is good. And then finally, oh, I guess also it won't hurt if you press these buttons while it's awake. So technically that's sleep 0, delay 1, timer enable, keeps being fired every time I'm pressing these, but it's not going to kill anyone. If you wait a little while, it still goes to sleep, still wakes up, everything's good. Now to me, this does raise an interesting question. Is this any better than the dimming thing? Because we still have a whole lot of mess in here. In fact, this particular mess makes me very uncomfortable. And this is pretty ugly here. So yes, maybe it's technically more correct for the screen to be in sleep and not faking sleep, but I've kind of weighed all of these options, and what I'm going to use for my screen is the screensaver method. I'd like it to be displaying some kind of ambient information, weather or something like that, and you just walk up and tap the screen, you get your control panel, and then you can turn the lights on and off, whatever. And when you walk away for a while, it goes back to the weather. But you do you. I hope you found that informative and useful, or at least enjoyable, and if you did, you know what to do. I also promised something special at the end of the video. Here's what it is. There's a lot of people out there who are making really awesome custom UIs, and I thought it would be fun if we got together and had a bit of a show and tell. So I'd like to invite everybody who's made something for the NS panel and who's willing and comfortable to show it off to join me on a live stream. Bring your creations, we'll go through what you did, how you accomplished it, any tips and tricks you have, and then we'll put it up on the channel and share it with the community. So if you have something you might be able to show off, whether you've done a completely custom interface or you just found a good use for the widgets in the stock UI, please take a look at the link in the video description. I have a little form there where you can give me your contact info. I'll reach out to you. We'll figure out if there's a time that we can get as many people as possible together. And I know the time's not going to work. We have people all over the world. So if you can't make the live stream, you can send a video clip and we'll put that in as well. Please get in touch. I think we can make an amazing video together. Share it with the community, spread the love, and encourage more people who have these things to get as much use out of them as possible. I'm excited. I hope you are too. I want to thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.